The neighbour who noticed it first was Mary Peckham. That Monday morning, the chickens hadn't been let out. The Moore house was silent. The blinds were down on every window. She knocked. No one came. She went and found Josiah Moore's brother, Ross Moore, and together they pushed open the door. 8 people had been alive when they went to bed the night before. All 8 were dead before sunrise. Every mirror in the house had been covered, some with clothing pulled from drawers, some with bed linen. And whoever did this had plenty of time. The temperature that evening had been in the low 70s. The church windows were open. The children's day program at the Presbyterian Church ran until around 9:30. Josiah Moore walked his family home through the warm summer dark. His wife Sarah, their 4 children, Herman, aged 11, Mary, aged 10, Arthur, aged 7, and Paul, aged 5. And 2 guests, sisters Lena and Ina Stillinger, who had been at the same program and had been invited to spend the night. The lamps went down. 8 people went to bed. Sometime after the house went quiet, someone entered. The weapon was an axe. Josiah Moore's own axe, taken from the barn out back. The killer moved through the house from room to room, beginning with Josiah and Sarah in the downstairs bedroom. Then up the stairs, through each child's room, methodically. Then back down to the guest room, where the Stillinger girls slept. The county physician, Dr. J. Clark Cooper, who arrived that morning, estimated all 8 had been killed between midnight and 5 a.m. The windows had been latched from the inside afterward. The ceilings of the bedrooms were gouged. The axe blade had struck the ceiling on the backswing, leaving marks in the plaster directly above each victim. The killer had stood inside the room, close. Every mirror in the house had been covered. Nobody has ever established why. By 10 a.m., the front gate was blocked. Men in work clothes stood 3 deep on the sidewalk. The county sheriff had not yet arrived. There was no forensic protocol, not in Villisca, Iowa, in 1912. Townspeople picked things up, set them down. Evidence was handled, moved, contaminated before investigators from out of town arrived. What investigators did document was specific. The axe had been wiped. A slab of bacon was found near the axe. Where it came from and why it was there was never determined. A kerosene lamp from the attic had been moved to the bedroom where the Stillingers slept. Set on the floor, wick turned down low. Someone had wanted light in that room. Enough to see by, but not enough to show through the windows. Lena Stillinger, the older of the 2 sisters, showed a defensive wound on her arm. She had been awake, or had woken. She was the only one. Every other victim appeared to have died in their sleep, mid-position, without having moved. Dr. Cooper's findings described the skull fractures as consistent with repeated, concentrated blows. The injuries to each victim clustered to the same region, the angle uniform, suggesting the attacker had not changed position between strikes. The wounds were inflicted after the victims were already unconscious, likely from the first blow. The killer had continued after each person was already gone. The ceiling gouges were measured at roughly 5 feet from the floor at their lowest point, consistent with a right-handed individual of average height swinging a standard American felling axe. The Rock Island line ran through Villisca. A train had passed through around midnight, the beginning of the window Dr. Cooper placed the murders in. Someone could have arrived, someone could have left. The bacon near the axe, the lamp moved from the attic, the mirrors covered room by room. Together, these details described not just a crime, but a person. Someone who moved through the house with deliberate purpose after the killing was done, arranging what they needed to arrange before they walked out the door. The case pulled in investigators from across the state, private detectives hired by the community, and eventually, a man named James Newton Wilkerson, a former operative retained by the Moore family's attorney to conduct the primary investigation. The first suspect the public fixed on was Frank Fernando Jones, a state senator and former employer of Josiah Moore. Moore had left Jones's implement business to start a competing operation and had, according to some accounts, taken a valuable client account with him. Wilkerson believed Jones had hired a traveling hardware salesman named William Mansfield to carry out the killings. Mansfield was investigated. He was never charged. No money trail connecting Jones to any hired arrangement was ever produced, and no witness to such a hire came forward at any point during the investigation or either subsequent trial. The second suspect came with a confession. In 1917, a man named Reverend George Kelly, an itinerant preacher who had attended the Children's Day program the night of June 9th and departed on a train afterward, confessed to the murders in writing. He was tried twice. The first trial ended in a hung jury. The second ended in acquittal. Kelly recanted the confession, claiming he had written it in a state of religious mania. The details in Kelly's written confession were later compared against newspaper coverage from 1912. Investigators who believed him pointed to specifics they argued had not been publicly reported. Investigators who doubted him pointed out that the Villisca case had been covered exhaustively in regional papers for years before he wrote a word, and that a man who had been present at the church that evening would have had access to everything a careful reader could absorb. What is documented? Kelly left Villisca on the first train after the church program. He was seen at the depot. The train departed around midnight, the beginning of Dr. Cooper's window. The same train that could have carried someone away could just as easily have carried someone in. Investigators working the case in the years after 1912 identified a pattern. In the 4 years surrounding the Villisca murders, rural Midwestern families had been killed in their beds, at night, with blunt-edged weapons, in circumstances that shared a signature. Multiple victims, methodical movement through the house, little physical trace left behind, and entry and exit that witnesses and investigators could not account for. The documented cases included a family in Colorado Springs in September 1911, 6 people killed in Ellsworth, Kansas in June 1911, 5 people in Paola, Kansas in April 1912, and a family in Rainier, Washington in 1909. Each location sat near a rail line. Each attack happened at night. In each case, the family had been asleep. In each case, the weapon was a blunt instrument, often found at or near the scene. In each case, no one had heard anything. Wilkerson and others came to believe a single killer was moving through the rail network, boarding trains between towns, selecting houses close to the tracks, entering after midnight, and gone before the first light. Against that theory, no physical evidence, no tool match, no fingerprint, no fiber or material was ever produced connecting any of the other scenes to Villisca. The pattern was geographic and behavioral. It was consistent enough to be suggestive and incomplete enough to prove nothing. What stayed unresolved was not the profile, but the identity beneath it. The covered mirrors pointed to someone for whom the act had structure beyond the violence itself, a specific anxiety or a specific ritual performed in the dark of a house full of people who would never ask why. The lamp moved from the attic and set on the floor with its wick turned low. The axe wiped clean. The bacon left beside it, sauce and purpose still unaccounted for. The windows latched from the inside. These were not the actions of someone who had panicked. They were the actions of someone who stayed and did what they intended to do, and then left on their own terms. If there was a traveller moving the rail lines, and Villisca was one stop among many, investigators who pursued the regional pattern believed he had killed before June 10, 1912, and likely killed after it. No confirmed forensic link has ever closed that case. The case was never formally closed. No one was ever convicted. George Kelly was acquitted. William Mansfield was never charged. Frank Jones died in 1944 with no evidence ever produced against him sufficient for trial. The house at 508 East 2nd Street still stands. It has been preserved and operates as a historical site. People can walk through it, sleep in it if they choose. The rooms look roughly as they did. The ceilings in the upstairs bedrooms still carry the marks. The three serious suspects each represent a genuinely different shape of answer. If Jones was responsible, it was premeditated murder contracted for financial motive, calculated in an office before it was carried out in those bedrooms. The Stillinger girls would have been incidental, unforeseen, collateral. Against that, no money trail, no intermediary, no witness to any arrangement was ever found. If Kelly was responsible, the motive was something different entirely, closer to compulsion. The act structured around ritual rather than plan. The mirrors, the lamp, the hours spent in the house after everyone was dead. Against that, every detail in his confession had appeared in regional newspaper coverage available to anyone who had followed the case. And juries who heard the evidence twice declined to convict. If neither of them was responsible, if it was someone who arrived on the midnight train and left before dawn, then the case has no surviving thread. The Iowa Bureau of Criminal Investigation lists it as unsolved. It still does. Mary Peckham stood on her porch that June morning and noticed the chickens hadn't been let out. That was what she noticed first. The wrong, ordinary thing. The small absence before the large one. 8 people went to sleep in that house. Nobody heard a sound. And by the time anyone understood what the silence meant, the person who made it was already gone. The Villisca axe murders remain officially unsolved. Thank you for watching. If a story like this is why you're here, hit subscribe. We open a new file every few days. Every file in the vault has a story. We'll see you at the next one.